Let's talk more now about the main contenders in Israel's election with Seth Frantzman. He is opinions editor with the Jerusalem Post. Thanks so much for joining us, Seth. What do you make of what the exit polls are saying at the moment? Pretty much neck and neck. How do you see this playing out?
Right, so I think of the three polls, there is one on Channel 12 that shows Gantz's blue and white a few points above Netanyahu's Likud, but the other polls seem to show them, as you said, very, very close. So if it turns out that the average is somewhere in between the two, what it means is that it may mean Gantz will have to try to form a government, but it's going to be very, very difficult for him because he's going to have to cobble together not only left-wing parties, but also try to get some religious parties or right-wing parties as well.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Either way, it's going to be a big scramble in the coming days.
Of course. What could a potential blue and white coalition look like? What are the options on the table? And has he given any indication in the lead-up of who he'd like to go into coalition with?
I mean, I don't know if he's given exact indications. I mean, he said that he won't sit with Netanyahu, so that would mean he'll have to choose Labour and Meretz, which are the more ostensibly left-leaning parties, and then he would have to go into the center with Kahlon, and then he would have to dangle something in front of the religious and right-wing parties to bring them in. Even those parties have said they won't sit with him because, for instance, the religious parties don't like his partner, Yair Lapid, who is kind of considered as anti-religious. So he'll have to try to bribe them somehow to bring them in, and that would mean dangling a big ministry in front of them. So, you know, that would give these small parties a lot of leverage and almost blackmail over the government, which is actually kind of typically how Israeli politics always works, which is that some little party always is able to kind of almost blackmail the government because things are so close.
These proportional systems, small parties often become the kingmakers. What do you think it is about the blue and white alliance that has drawn so much support, whether it turns out that Gantz has given the nod to go ahead and try and form a coalition or not? This is a very new alliance and one that's garnered a lot of support fairly quickly.
Well, I think in Israel there's always a lot of support for a large centrist kind of party that's the alternative to Netanyahu. Netanyahu's been in power for 10 years, and if you look back, Netanyahu's always had to face off against a large kind of centrist party, whether it was Kadima years ago or whether it was what was called the Zionist Camp or Zionist Union in the last election. So what it shows you is that there's a large number of Israelis who are basically in the center, who are always fishing around for an alternative. And the fact is that they don't usually come up with quite enough votes, or Netanyahu is able to kind of outmaneuver them. So, and I also think sometimes the perception that blue and white is a left or center-left party is a mistake. I mean, I think it's basically a very large centrist party with 3 former chiefs of staff. Obviously, that means a huge military background in its ranks.
The credentials that many Israelis look for. You wrote recently that you believe no matter who forms a coalition government or who becomes prime minister, that the larger issues of conflict with Gaza and occupation of the West Bank will not be addressed. Why is that?
Well, I think the larger issue is that Israeli society is in a consensus that basically they don't feel that the peace agreements of the 1990s actually led to peace. And they tend to, of course, I think, see Hamas as a terrorist organization. They basically care a lot about security, and I think they're not interested in trying to test the waters in terms of a new type of peace deal because they think it will bring instability. So I think if you survey the Israeli electorate, you find a huge consensus on that issue. And I think there's no evidence that the party, for instance, Gantz's party, is actually running on any sort of discussion of a new peace deal. And I don't think, by the way, even Meretz or Labour really have a concept of how they could actually get Israel to withdraw from the West Bank. And I don't think any of them have presented a long-term plan of how they think Gaza will look in 10 or 20 years.
Unfortunately, we will have to leave it there. Thank you for that, though. That is Seth Frantzman, the opinions editor with the Jerusalem Post.